So good afternoon or good morning to everyone. And thank you to the organizers and to Mr. Toro for his opening words, and to Ospesca and others for the invitation, and to Nestor, of course. What I've asked today, I've been asked to set a little bit the stage on what the blue economy looks like, what it is, and talk a little bit about the concepts and trends that stem from the blue economy. I hope not to be very confusing, because of course this is quite a broad term with a lot of interpretation, but I'll try to clarify what it is like, and then just highlight some approaches on the blue economy. Some of other panelists will go in depth onto what the blue economy means in different sectors, but we'll give a broad view. So next slide, please. So what is the blue economy? Fancy word that we've been using for the past 5, 6, 8 years. The problem is, of course, there's no standard definition of what the blue economy means, and it's interpreted differently and applied differently. But really, it looks at to how do we generate sustainable long-term value from blue sectors, and how can we decouple this idea that conservation or sustainability and economic and livelihood growth are incompatible. It's about looking at the sector as a whole and trying to work out and prioritize between the different economic activities, how to best utilize the assets that in general terms, the ocean can provide us, and how we make decisions on that to ensure that we have decent livelihoods and long-term sustainability. This is not necessarily, of course, a utopian view. There are always trade-offs, but it is about getting long-term benefits from the ocean, both changing how we do business right now and generating new sustainable options. Next slide, please. Now, one might ask oneself, what's the difference between green economy and blue economy, and what's blue growth, and all these terms that are sent around. Really, they have different sources, and different people came up with the terms at different stages, but the ones we use right now as an international community really stem from the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development in 2012, what we call Rio Plus 20. And they're one of the most prominent features with the issue of a green economy, where we are trying to, or the green economy refers to this systemic change in how the economy works, moving from sort of the business as usual, unsustainable processes that we have right now to more integrated, sustainable, long-term approach. It is about generating growth, but it's about generating growth through a systemic change, right? And like I mentioned before, decouple this idea that conservation and sustainability cannot exist with economic growth. Now, during this conference, a lot of small island developing states and other partners said, well, when we apply the green economy to aquatic ecosystems, we come up with the blue economy. Now, like I said, there are different definitions, but really the blue economy is about applying these systemic change principles to the aquatic environment. For most people, this means the ocean, but for certain organizations, certainly FAO, this also includes inland waters and other inland aquatic ecosystems. And really, that's what the blue economy means. Now, from there, we go into the blue growth. Now, what is blue growth? This is the strategic actions that we are required to achieve the blue economy, and we'll talk about in a second what this means. But this is general what these refer. Now, in certain countries, in certain spaces, blue growth and blue economy are used interchangeably, but that of course can get complicated. Some people use a blue economy just to define the ocean economy as a whole without considering the sustainability. And personally, we don't agree with that, and that's not what came out of the Rio Plus 20 conference. And like I said, depends on the countries and the organizations. In the Caribbean, we already have countries such as Barbados or Dominica who have blue economy ministries. Same thing with Kenya, for example, or Mauritius. Whereas the blue growth, we have blue growth strategies in certain countries, most prominently in the European Union, but also China, Cape Verde, Indonesia. Their strategies and their policies are named blue growth. But really, these are the actions that we are trying to look for to achieve a blue economy, and the blue economy is the systemic change that we are looking for. I hope I didn't make that more complicated than it is, but as terms are fancied around it, sometimes they get a bit confused. Next slide, please. And this is the slide I thank a couple of my colleagues here in FAO that just gives us a perspective of the value that we have in the natural assets, in this case, for the oceans. Now, this doesn't mean that this is entirely what we could achieve from the oceans, but it does give an idea to decision makers, to stakeholders of what we have, the opportunity that we have in oceans, if we are able to manage them effectively, sustainably, through the appropriate processes that Porfirio was just referencing and that you will discuss in the rest of this workshop. So there's great potential in the ocean. It's about how do we go about sustainably generating those benefits. Next slide, please. And of course, Porfirio rightly mentioned the contribution of the blue economy to the Sustainable Development Goals. We often think of the blue economy and associated activities as supporting achieving Sustainable Goal 14, which is about life underwater. And of course, this is true. But a small paper I was looking at earlier this year gives you an idea of where research and where different reports and activities associated with the blue economy are looking at in terms of the SDGs. So we see SDG 15 and SDG 13 on climate change, on conservation of areas, 1, 2, and 3, which have to do with poverty, hunger, health and security. When we talk about the private sector, institutions, peace and prosperity, when we work in the blue economy and when we work to achieve the blue economy, we are also supporting how countries can meet their sustainable development goals. So we have to look at the oceans in particular and aquatic environments in general as a means to achieve these goals that we have set for ourselves as a global community, not just sustainable SDG 14, but rather a whole host of SDGs that you can see here in these charts. Next slide, please. So what are some common approaches? Two examples are here. On the left on your screen, you can see the World Bank Blue Economy Development Framework, which focuses on interventions in order to achieve better, improved livelihoods for fishers, new sources of economic growth, improved conservation and prosperity, reducing pollution, and this is their strategy in terms of investments, of how they will invest to generate blue economy. They also have obviously an internal and external strategy, and that's their focus on. We're not going to go in depth, but just to give you an idea. On the other side, you have the European Union. Every year, the European Union publishes a report on their state of their blue economy, both in terms of conservation, contribution to decent livelihoods, economic contribution, innovation, etc. And it's an excellent resource for those that want to see how sort of the monitoring of a blue economy might look like. If you click next, we also look a bit at the blue economy. Sorry, that's fine, thank you. The blue growth strategy that the European Union uses to generate or to enhance the blue economy. Now, currently, this strategy focuses on the 5 areas that they consider have growth potential for decent livelihoods and economic development, such as aquaculture, blue energy, maritime and coastal tourism, marine mineral resources, and blue technology. This would be different for every country and for every region. And in fact, you notice that fisheries is not there. And while there are discussions in the European Union regarding particularly small-scale fisheries, the idea is that most of them are perhaps maximized, and value chains in Europe regarding fisheries perhaps don't have necessarily the scope for growth. But this, of course, would not be the case in many countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. So then they would have to adjust what their strategy looks like in terms of the areas where they could see efficient growth. United Nations Environmental Program also has an initiative on the sustainable blue economy. and they're developing a blue economy decision framework. UNEP and others have also developed the sustainable blue finance principles to guide investment into the blue economy. The Caribbean Development Bank has a blue economy strategy. The African Union has a blue economy strategy. Countless NGOs and foundations have their strategies and policies regarding the blue economy and blue growth. So this idea that to look at the ocean as an opportunity, both in terms of conservation and in terms of use of its assets, is really quite widespread now. And we have individual countries that have established blue economy policies and strategies that will guide them towards this integrated management that we are looking for, and really generate that livelihood growth from the ocean sustainably, of course. And at the point of the blue economy across all of these different strategies and policies is about preserving the world's oceans and aquatic ecosystems, ensuring that they maximize their contribution to the DGs, and that ocean management and good resource use are an opportunity to develop sustainable economies. And very quickly, next slide, please, before I finish, just to give an idea of where we enter as FAO into this concept. We, of course, focus on fisheries and aquaculture, which are our strengths. And it is very important that we as organizations and as countries and as stakeholders work in the areas where we have the comparative advantage and collaborate with others so that the whole pool of knowledge and expertise can be generated. And for us, when we work in a country in terms of developing blue economy through blue growth, we're looking to create the favorable conditions for a transition to the blue economy in fisheries and aquaculture, to improve the governance of aquatic ecosystems, preserve biodiversity and habitat, and of course include all stakeholders along the value chain so that any gains are distributed equitably and justly. And on this image, you see sort of the process by which we create enabling conditions. Then we do particular investments or interventions in these three core areas, which is blue trade, blue production, and blue communities, to try to generate blue growth and contribute to the blue economy from fisheries and aquaculture perspective. Now, if you look at the next slide, we do have a couple of initiatives in Latin America, and these are just to let you know that we are just about to begin, for example, Blue Economy in the Caribbean project with the Latin American Development Bank, CRFN, FAO, and JEF. And that obviously focuses on fisheries and aquaculture and how we can include the sector into marine spatial planning processes to promote blue growth, and how we can develop an ecosystem approach to fisheries that leads us towards this blue economy. And we are currently also implementing the actions of the high-level planning on blue economy and fisheries. This was a meeting of high-level representatives from Latin American countries in 2017, and they developed an action plan that we are currently executing throughout the continent through a variety of projects and initiatives. And this is just a small sample of broader scale projects that FAO is contributing to in the Caribbean, besides any other initiatives jointly where we collaborate jointly with other partners. So very quickly, just some parting thoughts on the next slide on blue economy, and to highlight some of the things that Mr. Toro and Mr. Diaz had said. It does require, if we as countries are moving towards blue economy, we do require a dramatic shift from current practices, both in the way government administers the resources, how stakeholders generate their livelihoods, and how we work together to develop new approaches. As Mr. Toro mentioned, there is no size fits all. Countries must prioritize how they will go about their blue economy transitions through an open process that is participatory. And I want to use this opportunity to highlight the issue of transparency, because not every investment in oceans and not every source of economic growth in oceans is directly blue economy. And this is a strong argument in terms of blue washing. Just because we might have a large investment, let's say in a port facility, that will generate contributions to local or national GDP, that does not mean that that is the blue economy. The blue economy is tied to sustainability, and it's tied to both social, economic, and environmental gains. So we have to be careful as an international community and as local practitioners of not promoting unsustainable practices under the guise of the blue economy, when really it's just about traditional economic development and traditional GDP growth. The blue economy does need strategic partnerships, much like the ones we are discussing today, in order to generate the required finances, because it is expensive. We have to do investments to transition. Transitions are always expensive, and these partnerships are required. And finally, we must engage the private sector and stakeholders, from the one fisherman who has his own enterprise, or the one guide who has his own tourist facility, all the way up to large corporations. They need to be involved early, and they need to be made aware of any blue economy transition or any marine spatial planning process, because they are key to investing in local areas. And wherever the government can't reach, they are the ones that really generate change, and will generate ultimately the majority of the investment if we are going to transition in terms of our economic strategy. So that's a very quick overview of what a blue economy looks like right now across the world and in the region, and how different organizations might be looking at the concept. And if you want to know more, of course, I'm not sure what the questions will look like right now, but we are always available to discuss this potential. And thank you very much.